At 14, my mom told me I couldn't join the family Christmas trip unless I called her new husband Dad. I refused and watched her world collapse, a brutal divorce, a custody battle she lost, and a daughter who grew up, never knowing the brother she tried to erase. My name's Liam, and when I was 13, my life turned into a very expensive experiment about family values. I didn't hate my stepdad, Greg. Hating him would have meant caring enough to try. What I felt was closer to irritation, like a mosquito that kept landing on my arm and calling itself my father. That summer, my mom, Clara, married Greg, and our house turned from casual chaos into military headquarters. Greg was ex-army, the kind of man who alphabetized spices and believed weekends were for mowing lawns, not sleeping in. Dinner happened at exactly 6. Chores appeared on a laminated schedule on the fridge. He even installed a whiteboard in the hallway labeled Weekly Objectives. My name was always there, usually next to something I hadn't agreed to do. Clara called it structure. I called it living in a spreadsheet. Before Greg, things were messy but manageable. My dad, David, wasn't around much. New jobs, new cities, a string of almost successes. But when he showed up, he made life feel lighter. We'd order too much pizza, play video games, and laugh until Mom yelled about bedtime. She called him unreliable. I called him Dad. Greg was different. Dependable, serious, a man who treated grocery lists like mission plans. I might have respected him if Mom had left me alone about it, but she couldn't. It started small. Greg picked you up from school. Say thank you. Then, you should call him Dad now. It would mean a lot. Then, you need to call him Dad. It's disrespectful not to. I refused. Greg didn't care. Call me whatever makes you comfortable, he'd say. But Mom treated it like a national security issue. One night at dinner, she asked me to pass the salt and added, "And thank Dad for making this meal possible." I stared at her for 10 seconds, slid the salt across the table, and said nothing. Greg cleared his throat and changed the subject. By fall, she decided therapy would fix me. Family bonding, she called it. The therapist, a man who wore too many pens, listened while she explained my attachment issues. When it was my turn, I said I wasn't resisting anything. I already had a dad. He scribbled notes, probably writing smartass. Therapy didn't help. It just gave Mom new vocabulary. Now I wasn't just rude, I was emotionally avoidant. Greg sat silently through every session, hands folded, eyes distant, like he'd rather be defusing a bomb. At home, Mom's campaign escalated. She read my texts for safety, blocked visits with Dad for family plans, and once handed me a pre-written speech to read at dinner about how much I appreciated Greg's leadership. I tore it in half and asked if dessert was still happening. She cried that night. Greg went for a run. By winter, we were living in two realities. In hers, we were healing and growing. In mine, we were trapped in a hostage negotiation with better furniture. David noticed the changes. He started calling more, suggesting road trips, offering extra weekends. Most of them were mysteriously blocked by conflicts. I told him not to worry. I lied. By spring, I was used to the new normal. 10 p.m. curfews, mandatory Sunday dinners, and a weekly therapy appointment where strangers analyzed my tone. I wrote in my journal one night, apparently, respect comes in 3 forms: verbal, financial, and tattooed on your forehead. It was a joke, but part of me suspected she'd actually consider the tattoo. The summer I turned 14 was approaching, and the pressure was rising. Clara was convinced that if she pushed hard enough, I'd break. Greg was convinced he could stay neutral forever. And I was convinced that one word, Dad, was about to cost us more than any of us could imagine. By the time I turned 14, the dad situation had gone from background noise to Clara's full-time job. It stopped being a suggestion and became a mission, and I was the enemy combatant. She started small, as always. A fun fishing trip one Saturday morning, where Greg taught me how to cast a line. I didn't ask to go, but apparently bonding was mandatory now. She took pictures of us in matching hats and posted them online with captions like, "Father and son time. Nothing stronger than this bond." The comments were full of heart emojis. I didn't even like fishing. Then came the family photos. She scheduled a session with a photographer and insisted we all wear coordinated outfits. At one point, she told me, "Smile like you're proud of your dad." I smiled like I was posing for a mugshot. When Father's Day rolled around, she pushed it further. "We're all writing speeches," she announced over breakfast, "about what Greg means to us." I told her I'd rather write about climate change. She didn't laugh. I wrote nothing. Every refusal turned the air in the house thicker. Greg tried to stay out of it. He'd say things like, "It's fine, Clara," or "He doesn't need to do anything he's not ready for." But the more neutral he stayed, the more determined she became. To her, my refusal wasn't just teenage stubbornness. It was defiance. And defiance needed to be broken. Then Greg dropped a bomb. He wanted to adopt me. He brought it up one evening after dinner, as casually as if he were suggesting we repaint the living room. It's just paperwork, he said, but it would make us official. Clara's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Mine narrowed. No, I said immediately. Why not? She asked. Because I already have a dad. That answer wasn't enough. She launched into a monologue about responsibility and sacrifice, how Greg had been there when David wasn't, how blood didn't make a parent, commitment did. It was a good speech, almost convincing, but it wasn't my job to make Greg feel like his efforts paid off. From that moment, the campaign intensified. She started correcting me every time I said Greg's name. At church, if I asked, "Where's Greg?" she'd chirp, "You mean Dad?" Loud enough for everyone to hear. At school events, she'd introduce him as Liam's father and shoot me a warning look if I didn't follow her lead. Even online, she couldn't stop. A photo of me and Greg fixing the lawnmower appeared on her Facebook with the caption, "A son learning from his father. This is what real family looks like." I commented, "That's Greg." She deleted the comment within minutes. The real breaking point came at a Sunday family dinner. Greg's parents, the Hollises, were there, along with Clara's sister and a couple of neighbors she was trying to impress. It was one of those over-the-top dinners with roast beef, crystal glasses, and way too many side dishes. Clara had set the table like we were expecting royalty. Halfway through the meal, she stood up with her wine glass. "I think," she said, "that this is a perfect time for Liam to say a few words. About his father." I stared at her. "What?" "About Greg," she clarified, smiling too hard. "How much he means to you. How grateful you are." I shook my head. "I don't have anything to say." Her smile froze. "Liam, please." The room was silent. Every eye was on me. Greg looked uncomfortable, his fork hovering over his plate. "Say something," Clara pressed. "Anything." I could have said something neutral. "Thanks for being here. I appreciate what you do." But I was tired. Tired of the pushing, the pretending, the constant public performances. "He's not my dad," I said. "He's your mistake." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was seismic. Greg's chair scraped the floor as he stood and walked out of the room without a word. Clara's face went white, then red, then pale again. One of the Hollises muttered something about needing air and excused himself. The neighbors exchanged glances and suddenly remembered they had somewhere to be. Within 5 minutes, the table had cleared. Just me, Clara, and a half-eaten roast that nobody wanted anymore. She sat there, staring at her plate, tears running down her face in silence. I finished my potatoes, put my dish in the sink, and went to my room. Later, when I replayed that moment, I realized how much damage 6 words could do. Greg didn't speak to me for days. Clara locked herself in the bedroom and cried so loudly the neighbors probably heard. The Hollises stopped inviting us over for Sunday dinners. And for the next several weeks, I was officially labeled the problem. Clara called it the night I humiliated this family. Everyone else called it understandable teenage anger. I called it Tuesday. The house changed after that. Clara became quieter around me, more brittle. Greg started coming home later from work. Family dinners turned into silent meals where we stared at our plates and pretended nothing had happened. I thought maybe the war was over, that they'd finally accept I wasn't going to change just because they wanted me to. But Clara wasn't done. If anything, that night convinced her she'd been too gentle before. She'd tried kindness. She'd tried therapy. Now she was ready to try consequences. By the time winter rolled around, Clara had traded subtle manipulation for open warfare. My refusal to call Greg Dad was now treated like a national scandal. Therapy hadn't worked. Guilt trips hadn't worked. Public humiliation at the dinner table hadn't worked. So she decided to try one last desperate strategy: bribery dressed as a family vacation. The plan was pitched as one last trip before the baby arrives. Clara said it was about bonding, making memories, and starting a new chapter. But the truth was obvious. It was a photo op with palm trees. Greg booked everything: flights, hotels, park passes, the works, even matching t-shirts. Because nothing says authentic family like coordinated polyester with a hashtag on the back. He was excited, I'll give him that. He'd been saving up vacation days for months, and he talked about the trip like it was going to fix everything. Clara was worse. She'd started calling it our fresh start. Every time I questioned why I even needed to be there, she'd say, "Because this is how families heal." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't argue. The trip was scheduled for Christmas break, and I figured if nothing else, I could at least enjoy a week away from freezing weather and algebra homework. One night, about a week before we were set to leave, I overheard Clara on the phone with a friend. "This is going to be the trip that changes everything," she said, pacing the kitchen. "Once we're all there together, he'll finally feel like part of the family. He'll stop fighting it." I rolled my eyes so hard it hurt. Being part of the family wasn't something you earned by standing in line for overpriced churros. A few days later, I was on the phone with my friend Noah, talking about the trip. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going with my mom and Greg." Clara was walking past the room as I said it. She froze mid-step. "What did you just say?" I turned around. "I said I'm going with you and Greg." Her eyes narrowed. "You mean your dad?" "No," I said. "I mean Greg." The room went dead silent. Her jaw clenched, and for a second I thought she might actually throw the mug in her hand. "You are still doing this? After everything we've been through? After everything he's done for you?" "Yeah," I said, "because he's Greg, and my dad is still my dad." She stood there, shaking, like I'd just committed high treason. "Apologize? For what?" "For disrespecting this family." "I'm not apologizing for telling the truth." Her voice dropped to that cold, quiet tone that always meant she was about to do something drastic. "Then you're not going." I laughed because I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. The next morning, she knocked on my door with a printed itinerary and a speech ready. "We are not paying for you to come on this trip if you're going to keep insulting the man who provides for you," she said. "This is a family vacation. And if you don't want to be part of this family, you can stay here." "Fine," I said. "I'll stay with Dad." "Perfect," she said, and walked out. Greg didn't argue. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. I could tell he hated the idea of leaving me behind, but he wasn't going to fight Clara over it. He packed his bags, checked flight times, and stayed quiet. When the day of the trip came, I stood on the porch as the taxi pulled up. Clara didn't say goodbye. Greg gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Maybe next time." And then they were gone, off to Florida to build the perfect family narrative without the one person refusing to read from the script. I spent Christmas with Dad. It wasn't glamorous. We ate Chinese takeout and watched bad holiday movies on cable, but it was easy, honest. No one corrected how I referred to anyone. No one demanded scripted speeches or staged photos. Meanwhile, Clara's vacation was plastered all over social media. There were pictures of them smiling in front of palm trees, Greg wearing Mickey ears, Clara holding her pregnant belly like a trophy. The captions were nauseating. "Our perfect little family, stronger than ever. Best Christmas yet with the people who matter most." The people who mattered most. That part stung more than I expected. A week later, the family Christmas card arrived in the mail. Glossy photo of Greg and Clara on the beach, her bump front and center. "Wishing you love from our growing family." My name wasn't anywhere on it. I tossed it in the trash. When they came back, no one mentioned the trip. Clara didn't ask how my Christmas was. Greg didn't bring me a souvenir. It was as if the week had been erased from the official family record. The tension was thicker than ever, but there was a new layer underneath it. Something sharper and colder. I'd drawn a line, and so had they. And now we were standing on opposite sides, pretending not to notice the canyon forming between us. The Florida trip was supposed to fix everything. Instead, it detonated whatever was left. When they came back, the house felt different. Not colder, exactly, but hollow. Like someone had taken the structure apart and put it back together slightly wrong. No one mentioned the trip. No one mentioned me. We just lived in the same space, orbiting around the silence. Then, the real war began. About 3 weeks after Christmas, a letter arrived from a lawyer. David was filing for a custody review. His argument was simple. I'd been emotionally harmed by my mother's behavior. He had therapist notes, screenshots of texts, and statements from school counselors. One of the documents claimed I felt unsafe in Greg's home. That wasn't exactly true. Unwanted would have been more accurate, but in legal language, unsafe sounded better. Clara's reaction was predictable. Nuclear. "This is your father's doing," she said, pacing the kitchen, waving the papers around. "He's manipulating you. He's trying to destroy this family." I shrugged. Maybe the family destroyed itself. She slammed the counter. "Do you have any idea how much we've done for you? How much Greg has sacrificed?" I didn't answer. I'd learned that silence was more effective than any argument. The custody hearing wasn't immediate. Those things never are. But David wasted no time building a case. My therapist's report mentioned verbal hostility and feelings of alienation. Emails Clara had sent me, the ones where she called Dad a useless paycheck and said I'd regret choosing him, were submitted as evidence. And the text she sent after banning me from the trip, the one that said, "Enjoy your holiday with your absentee father," was now officially part of a legal record. Clara spiraled. She started texting constantly, sometimes 30 messages in a day. If I didn't reply, she'd show up at Dad's house unannounced, standing on the porch with a casserole and a lecture. Once, she brought a folder full of receipts, school fees, medical bills, grocery costs, and laid them out on the table like evidence in a trial. Maybe your father will finally pay for something, she said, before slamming the door behind her. Her social life collapsed too. Word had spread about the Florida incident, and people she'd known for years started ghosting her. Church friends stopped replying to her messages. A parent group she ran quietly removed her as admin. Clara responded the only way she knew how, by doubling down online. She posted long rants about ungrateful children and deadbeat dads, each one more desperate than the last. Meanwhile, Greg was unraveling in his own quiet way. He'd stopped trying to mediate between us. At first, he'd say things like, "Let's all calm down," or "Maybe we should listen to each other." Now he just came home from work, ate in silence, and disappeared into the spare room. After a few weeks, that became permanent. He moved into the guest room full-time. I didn't care at first, but one night I overheard an argument in the kitchen. Clara was crying. Greg's voice was low but steady. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "You can't leave now," she said. "Not after everything we've built." "Built?" He laughed bitterly. "We haven't built anything. You've been at war with a 14-year-old, Clara. And for what? A word?" "It's not a word," she snapped. "It's about respect." "No," Greg said. "It's about control, and I'm done being part of it." The next morning, his side of the bed was empty for good. At first, for good just meant the guest room. He'd sleep there, leave early for work, come home late. We'd pass each other in the hallway like roommates with a bad lease. But 2 weeks after Ivy was born, I came home from school and his truck wasn't in the driveway. His clothes were gone from the guest room closet. The bathroom shelf where he kept his shaving kit was empty. Clara didn't say anything about it. Neither did I. He just left, moved to his parents' place, and started the paperwork. The house started to feel like a waiting room. Quiet, sterile, temporary. Clara was either on the phone with her lawyer or pacing the hallway muttering about alienation and manipulation. She still sent me texts every day, alternating between guilt trips and threats. One day it was, "I hope you're proud of what you're doing to this family." The next it was, "You'll regret choosing him over us." I stopped replying altogether. I stopped visiting too. Whenever she asked why, I told her I was busy. School, soccer, homework. The truth was simpler. I just didn't want to be there. By the time spring came, the custody hearing was set, the family was fractured, and no one was pretending anymore. Clara still believed she could force the world to bend to her version of reality. I'd stopped believing anything she said. And Greg? Well, Greg had quietly exited the battlefield. All that was left was the wreckage. And we hadn't even hit the worst of it yet. Ivy was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in late spring. I wasn't at the hospital. Greg was, technically. He'd been staying at his parents' house by then, answering Clara's texts with single words and avoiding the house entirely. But when labor started, he showed up, did his duty, stayed through the delivery, held the baby for exactly 3 minutes, and left before Clara could turn it into a reconciliation scene. No flowers, no photos, no celebration. When I heard Ivy had arrived, my first reaction wasn't joy. It was relief. Relief that maybe now Clara would focus on someone other than me. But that hope lasted about 5 minutes. She called that evening, voice shaking between anger and desperation. "Your sister's here," she said. "Do you even care?" "Of course I care," I said. "I just don't know what you want from me. I want you to be part of this family before it's too late." Too late had come and gone months ago. Clara brought Ivy home to a silent house. No family waiting, no balloons, no welcome home signs, just the echo of everything that had gone wrong. Then the court ruling arrived. David was granted temporary custody while the legal process played out. I was to live with him full-time until a final decision was made. Clara called it a betrayal. I called it a vacation. Packing my things was less dramatic than I expected. Clara cried the entire time, pacing the doorway as I folded clothes into a duffel bag. "You're abandoning us," she said. "After everything we've done." "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said. "I'm just leaving." "What about your sister? You're going to walk away from her too? She doesn't even know I exist. She needs you. She needs parents who aren't fighting with a teenager." When I zipped up the bag, she tried one last tactic. "We paid for your braces, your school, your soccer trips. This is how you repay us?" "Pretty sure you didn't do any of that for repayment," I said. "And Greg paid for most of it anyway." She slapped the wall, tears streaking down her face. "You're just like your father." "Good," I said, and walked out. David didn't celebrate when I moved in. He just cleared a drawer for my stuff and asked if I wanted pizza. For the first time in years, the air around me felt light. I didn't realize how heavy that house had been until I was out of it. Greg filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Irreconcilable differences, the papers said. That was one way to describe a war zone. Clara didn't talk about it directly, but the evidence of her unraveling was everywhere. She started showing up at my soccer games, standing on the sidelines and yelling my name. Not cheers, accusations. This isn't over, Liam. You'll regret this one day. Family isn't something you run from. My coach asked if she needed to be removed. I said no. It was easier to ignore her than to explain. Then came the emails. Long, rambling, midnight messages, with subject lines like "you don't understand" or "read this before you hate me forever." They always followed the same pattern. Pages of emotional manipulation, twisted memories, and dramatic declarations about how broken the family was without me. Sometimes she threatened to take David back to court. Sometimes she claimed Greg had begged her to forgive him. He hadn't. Sometimes she sent old photos of us at birthday parties, hoping nostalgia would do what guilt hadn't. I stopped reading them after a while. The final straw came one Saturday when she showed up at my new school uninvited. I was in the cafeteria when she appeared at the door, demanding to see me. Security had to walk her out. That afternoon, David filed for a restraining order. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene like on TV. It was a simple form and a short hearing. Clara didn't contest it. The house on Maple Street was empty now. Greg had moved out permanently. The Hollises stopped speaking to Clara entirely. Most of her friends had vanished. Even her church group distanced themselves. It was just her and Ivy, locked inside the echo chamber of her own bitterness. I wish I could say I felt guilty, but the truth is, I didn't. I felt sad, sure. Sad that it had come to this. That someone who once held the world together now couldn't even hold a conversation without it turning into a battle. But guilt? Number. Guilt would have meant I thought I'd done something wrong. The truth was simpler. I'd spent years trying to be the son she wanted, and when I stopped trying, she fell apart. That wasn't my fault. The first time I saw Ivy after the custody ruling, she was asleep in a stroller. Clara didn't speak to me, and I didn't try. We stood there in silence. Two people who shared blood but nothing else. She looked smaller than I expected. Not just Ivy, but Clara too. The woman who once controlled everything now looked like someone who'd lost control of herself. I left without saying goodbye. By summer, the divorce was finalized. Greg sold the house and moved 3 towns over. The custody case was leaning heavily in David's favor. And Clara? She was still sending emails. Fewer now, but still coming. The last one I read was short. Just a single sentence. One day you'll realize I was right. Maybe she believed that. Maybe she needed to. But by then it didn't matter. The war she'd been fighting was over. She'd won nothing. Lost everything. And I was no longer a soldier in her campaign. A baby sister who would grow up hearing her mother's version of the story long before she ever heard mine. Clara appealed. It failed within a month. Word spread through town. Some people treated me like a victim. Others whispered that I'd abandoned my mother. Teachers gave me pitying looks. Classmates asked questions I didn't answer. Meanwhile, Greg was already moving on. He moved into a condo closer to his job, started dating again, and by the end of the year, he was engaged to a woman named Erin. She was everything Clara wasn't. Calm, understated, allergic to drama. They married quietly in a courthouse ceremony. No matching t-shirts required. Clara lost her mind when she found out. He replaced us like we were nothing, she said during one of her calls, her voice shaking. He replaced you. I didn't bother reminding her that I'd never been his to replace. At one of my soccer games, she appeared on the sidelines, screaming at David across the field. "You're poisoning him against me," she shouted. "You think you can erase me?" The ref paused the match while staff led her away. My teammates stared. My coach asked if everything was okay. I told him, "So yeah, that's just my mom," and went back to the game. After that, David got a court order restricting her from contacting the school or attending events without permission. Clara called it proof that we were conspiring against her. I called it peace and quiet. Months passed. Life started to settle into something that almost felt normal. David and I took a road trip that summer. Nothing special, just a few days driving up the coast with no schedule and too many snacks. It was the first time in years that I'd spent that much uninterrupted time with him. He didn't lecture me or try to make deep conversations happen. We just drove, talked about dumb stuff, and laughed at the same stupid radio ads. For the first time, I realized that this was what family could look like when no one was trying to win. The final attempt came a few weeks before the restraining order went into full effect. She said she wanted to talk, just the 3 of us. Her, me, and Ivy. Against my better judgment, I agreed. David thought it was a bad idea. but I needed to see for myself if anything had changed. It hadn't. I walked into the restaurant and found not just Clara and Ivy, but also her sister and a woman I didn't recognize, probably from her estranged parents' support group. It wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush. Clara started in immediately. I need you to tell them how your father has manipulated you. I need you to be honest. I laughed. This was a mistake. You owe me this, she said, loud enough for people at nearby tables to turn and stare. You owe this family the truth. I stood up, dropped a 20 on the table for my soda, and walked out. That ambush dinner was the last straw. 2 days later, David went back to court and got the restraining order expanded. No contact, no surprise appearances, no more games. By the end of that year, Clara was living alone with Ivy in a small apartment on the edge of town. She'd cut her hair, deleted her social media accounts, and joined a support group for estranged parents. Greg and Aaron had bought a house in the suburbs. David and I had a routine that worked. My grades were steady. My room at Dad's place actually looked lived in. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was stable. And stability was something I hadn't felt in years. The story wasn't finished. There was still one person left to complicate it. Someone who hadn't had a say yet. And her name was Ivy. I was 24, working nights at a warehouse and pretending I liked the quiet when the message arrived. Hi, I think I'm your sister. My name is Ivy. Mom says I shouldn't write you, so I'm writing you. No emoji. No punctuation besides the period she earned. The account looked real. 2 kids on a playground, a lopsided cake, a cat that hated cameras. I stared at the screen long enough to feel foolish, and answered with the least poetic truth I had. Hi, Ivy. I'm Liam. I'm your brother, she replied an hour later. We're doing a school play on Friday. It's at 6. You don't have to come. I just thought maybe you could sit in the back and not tell anyone it's you. It was the first invitation I'd gotten from that side of the family that didn't come with a trapdoor. I told her I'd be there. Friday came cold and gray. The school was the kind with scuffed floors and a long bulletin board of kindness goals. I bought a ticket, took a program, and sat as far back as possible. The auditorium filled with parents who knew where to sit without being told. I kept my head down. Greg walked in first with a woman I recognized from photos. Aaron, the upgrade pack. He looked older, more gray, softer around the jaw, the kind of tired that comes from deciding not to fight storms anymore. The Hollises trailed behind them, still crisp, still certain. And then Clara arrived. She'd cut her hair short and sensible. The coat looked expensive. Her eyes did not. She scanned the seats like someone who expects an enemy and finds only strangers. For a moment, I wondered if she would spot me anyway. She didn't. Ivy tugged her hand and pointed to the stage, excited. Clara nodded, small and mechanical. The play was about winter animals learning to share berries. Low stakes, high squeakiness. Ivy appeared as a fox with felt ears and a tail that refused to cooperate. She delivered her lines with the kind of concentration usually reserved for bomb disposal. When she was done, she looked into the crowd. Her eyes moved past me, paused, then moved on. Smart kid. She'd said, "Don't tell anyone." I didn't. Greg clapped the way men clap when they're relieved the hard part is over. Erin beamed like she'd built the fox herself. Clara clapped late, then too long. The curtain fell. Parents stood. Chaos began. I waited until the room thinned out, then slipped into the hallway where student art tried to make fluorescent lights look friendly. Ivy rounded the corner like she'd trained for this. "You came," she said, out of breath. "I said I would," I said. We stood there, not hugging. She smelled like craft glue and stage dust. Up close, she had David's eyes and the rest split evenly between everybody else who'd made this mess. "I wanted to meet you before anyone told me I shouldn't," she said. "That's a good rule. You look like Mom around the eyebrows," she said. Clinical, unafraid. "I try not to." She smiled. "Quick, gone. I can't stay long," she said. "They'll notice. I just wanted to see if you were real." "I am, unfortunately." A door opened behind her. Greg stepped into the hall and stopped. We looked at each other like two people recognizing a house from a bad dream. Aaron hovered a step back, reading the air. Greg didn't move closer. "Points for that." "Hey," he said. Simple, civil. "Hey," I said. No speeches, no demands. Ivy looked between us like a referee checking pockets for weapons. Greg nodded once. The exact nod you give a driver who lets you merge. I gave it back. That was all. "I should go," Ivy said. "But I'm glad you came." "Me too," I said. "Break a leg." Retroactively. She frowned. "That's weird." "It is." She grinned and ran. Greg watched her go like a man who had learned to be careful with joy. Then he looked at me again. "You all right?" he asked. I'm fine. Good. He could have said more. I could have too. We didn't. He returned to his row of safe people. I slipped out the side door. Outside, the air was clean and cold. I stood by the bike racks and tried not to turn the whole thing into a metaphor. It was just a school play. A kid waved at a statue of a fox. A mother told a toddler to stop eating snow. Life continued at its usual stubborn pace. At home, I wrote a letter I knew I wouldn't send. I wrote it to Greg because that was easier than writing it to Clara. You were never my father. You didn't ask to be, and I sure didn't volunteer. But you showed up. You paid for things I didn't notice, and stood there while the adults turned our kitchen into a court. That counts, whether I said it then or not. I didn't call you Dad. You didn't need me to. Maybe that's the most important part. I folded the paper, put it in a drawer, and fed the cat. He resented me less than usual. Progress. Clara emailed me 3 days later. The subject line said, "Enough. The body was short. I know you were there. Don't make this worse." I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to win, because there was nothing left to argue about. She'd drawn a map where the only road to love ran through a single word. I'd taken the frontage road and found out it got me to the same town without the tolls. A week after the play, a card showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo of Ivy on the stage, fox ears crooked, mouth midline. On the back, in careful letters, she'd written, "That was me. Thanks for coming." I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Hospitality or a joke. Either way, it worked. June came. Father's Day lugged itself onto the calendar like a couch up a staircase. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, thinking about all the words I could write to the men who had held parts of my life. I didn't write most of them. To David, I sent a photo from the road trip and typed, "Next summer, longer drive, worse music." To Greg, I typed and deleted 3 drafts. Then I wrote the thing that fit. Thank you. No signature, no explanation. A message that could land or miss or vanish in the static. He didn't respond that day. But 2 weeks later, a package showed up. No note, just my old soccer cleats I'd left at the house years ago, cleaned and relaced. I didn't need them anymore. That wasn't the point. That night, I took Ivy's photo off the fridge and slid it into the drawer with the unsent letter. 2 artifacts. Not peace, exactly. Not closure. Just proof. People say the word dad is sacred. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I spent years treating it like a landmine, and year after that pretending the field was empty. Now it feels like a key that opens some doors and not others. You can hand it to someone. You can keep it in your pocket. The house is still the house. I locked up, turned off the kitchen light, and listened to the building settle around me. Somewhere in town, a fox costume was probably stuffed into a plastic bin, waiting for the next kid to try it on and make it mean something. Good luck to them. You can't demand the word. You can only earn it, lose it, or live without it. For the first time in years, all 3 options felt fine. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.